Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need when you least expect it. When you've been knocked down so many times that getting back up feels impossible, that's when grace finds a way to surprise you. Ava Jenkins inherited a rundown cabin in the Tennessee woods because her uncle knew she had nowhere else to go. At 52, she was tired of fighting to keep her head above water in the city. She packed up her 10-year-old daughter Lila and their old golden retriever Buck, hoping the quiet would give them all some peace. The cabin was falling apart, but it was theirs. Buck loved exploring the forest each morning. One day he came back with 5 lost children following behind him. They were dirty, scared, and had been living in the woods alone. Ava barely had enough for herself and Lila. But what happens when a woman who spent her whole life being overlooked suddenly becomes the only hope for children who need her more than anyone ever has? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a postal worker who looked at Ava's cramped apartment with the kind of pity that made her shoulders tense. Uncle Raymond was dead, and somehow, impossibly, he'd left her something. She'd barely spoken to the man in 20 years. But there it was, in black and white, a cabin in the Tennessee mountains. Free and clear, Ava sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by overdue bills and the constant hum of city traffic through thin walls, reading the lawyer's letter for the 3rd time. Her daughter Lila was at school, which meant she had exactly 4 hours to process this news before explaining to a 10-year-old why their lives were about to change again. The small wooden box on the table held everything. Precious Lila owned a photo of her father who'd died when she was 3, a pressed flower from their first apartment's window box, a handwritten story she'd written about a dog who could fly. It was Lila's memory box, and lately Ava had been watching her daughter add more items to it, as if she sensed their current life was temporary. Buck lifted his graying muzzle from his bed by the radiator, golden eyes watching Ava with the patience that had carried them through 7 years together. He'd been young when they'd gotten him from the shelter, back when Ava still believed in fresh starts and second chances. Now his coat was silver around the edges, and his movements carried the careful dignity of age. "What do you think, old boy?" she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Ready for another adventure?" The apartment felt smaller each day. 2 bedrooms for 3 souls, with walls so thin they could hear Mrs. Rodriguez's television through the night and the Johnson baby crying at dawn. Ava worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices before sunrise and stocking shelves at the grocery store until closing. But it was never enough. The rent had gone up again last month, and her car needed repairs she couldn't afford. She'd been treading water for so long. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have solid ground beneath her feet. When Lila came home from school, backpack dragging behind her like it weighed 100 pounds, Ava was ready. She'd made hot chocolate and laid out the letter on the table between them. "Mom, you look different," Lila said, dropping into her chair. "Did something good happen?" "Maybe," Ava said carefully. "How would you feel about living in the mountains? Just us and Buck?" Lila's eyes lit up with the kind of hope that broke Ava's heart and mended it in the same moment. "Like in the movies? With trees and everything?" "With trees and everything. Your Uncle Raymond, you remember me talking about him. He left us a cabin. It's ours if we want it. What about school? What about your jobs?" Such practical questions from such a young girl. Ava had raised her daughter to be realistic, maybe too realistic. "There are schools in Tennessee, and I'll find work. I always do." They spent the evening planning, spreading maps across the kitchen table, and looking up pictures of mountain cabins online. Buck seemed to sense the excitement, padding between them with his tail wagging for the first time in months. 3 weeks later, everything they owned fit into Ava's 12-year-old sedan and a small U-Haul trailer. The car groaned under the weight, but it held together for the 8-hour drive through changing landscapes, from urban sprawl to rolling hills to the pine-covered mountains of eastern Tennessee. The cabin sat at the end of a gravel, road that wound through trees so tall they blocked out most of the sky. It was smaller than Ava had imagined, with weathered wood siding and a porch that sagged on one corner. The roof looked solid enough, and the windows were intact, which was more than she'd dared hope for. "It's perfect," Lila breathed. Already running toward the front door, Ava wasn't sure about perfect, but it was theirs. The key was where the lawyer said it would be, under a loose board on the front step. The door swung open with a creak that spoke of years without visitors. Inside, dust motes danced in afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that hadn't been cleaned in decades. The furniture was simple. A couch that had seen better years, a wooden table with mismatched chairs, a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. Everything smelled of pine and old wood, and something else Ava couldn't identify. Maybe hope. Buck immediately claimed a spot by the fireplace, turning 3 careful circles before settling with a contented sigh. He looked more relaxed than he had in years. "Can I pick my room?" Lila asked, already heading toward a hallway that led to 2 small bedrooms. "Of course, sweetheart." Ava walked through the cabin slowly, running her fingers along the window sills and door frames. Uncle Raymond had built this place with his own hands, she remembered hearing. Every board and nail represented time and care, dreams of a simpler life. In the kitchen, she found a letter propped against an old coffee can. Her name was written across the front in handwriting she recognized from birthday cards sent sporadically throughout her childhood. "Ava," it began, "if you're reading this, then you needed this place as much as I hoped you would. I've been watching from a distance, and I know life hasn't been easy. This cabin has good bones and a better heart. It's seen joy and sorrow, but mostly it's seen people figuring out how to keep going when everything else falls apart. I built it for family, and your family, even if we lost touch. There's money in the account at First National in town, enough to get you started. The rest is up to you. The mountains have a way of showing us who we really are. I hope you like what you find. With love, Uncle Raymond." Ava sank into one of the kitchen chairs, letter trembling in her hands. She'd spent so many years feeling invisible, forgotten by family, and overwhelmed by responsibility. But Raymond had been watching. Raymond had cared enough to leave her a lifeline. "Mom?" Lila appeared in the doorway holding her memory box. "I picked the room with the window that looks at the biggest tree." "Is that okay?" "That's perfect, baby. Are you crying?" "Happy tears," Ava said, wiping her eyes. "Sometimes when something really good happens, we cry happy tears." Lila nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Can Buck sleep in my room tonight? I think he might be scared in a new place. I think Buck would like that very much." That first night, they ate sandwiches by candlelight because Ava hadn't figured out how to turn on the electricity yet. They told stories and listened to the sounds of the forest, wind through branches, an owl calling in the distance, the settling creaks of an old house welcoming new inhabitants. When Lila finally fell asleep, Buck curled protectively beside her bed. Ava sat on the front porch and looked up at more stars than she'd seen in years. The silence was profound after a lifetime of city noise. No sirens, no car horns, no neighbors arguing through thin walls. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Ava felt like she could breathe all the way down to her toes. Whatever came next, they would face it together in this place that Raymond had saved for them. This place where maybe, just maybe, they could build something lasting. The first week passed, in a blur of settling in and figuring out how to live in a place where the nearest neighbor was 3 miles away and the closest grocery store required a 20-minute drive down winding mountain roads. Ava had managed to get the electricity working and the well pump running. Small victories that felt enormous after years of depending on landlords and maintenance crews. Lila adapted to mountain life with the resilience of childhood, spending hours exploring the area around the cabin, while Buck followed at a careful distance. The old dog seemed to have found new purpose in these woods, his arthritis forgotten as he padded along forest trails with the confidence of a much younger animal. Every morning, Buck would disappear into the trees after breakfast, returning around noon with pine needles in his coat and a satisfied expression that suggested he'd been conducting important business. Ava didn't worry about him getting lost. He had the kind of instinct for home that came from years of being needed. "He's like a different dog up here," Lila observed one morning, watching Buck trot purposefully toward the tree line. "In the city, he just slept all the time. He's got room to be himself now," Ava replied, understanding the feeling completely. She'd enrolled Lila in the local elementary school, a small building that served children from all over the county. The teachers seemed kind, and Lila was making friends with the easy way children have when they're not burdened by adult prejudices. For the first time in years, Ava wasn't fielding phone calls about her daughter acting out or seeming distracted. Ava had found work too, cleaning a few houses in town and helping out at the local diner on weekends. It wasn't much, but combined with the money Uncle Raymond had left in the bank account, it was enough to keep them comfortable. More than comfortable, actually. For the first time since Lila's father died, Ava went to bed at night without calculating how many days they could survive on what was left in her checking account. On Thursday morning of their second week, Buck left for his usual forest expedition just after Lila caught the school bus. Ava was in the kitchen, planning a trip to town for groceries, when she heard voices outside. Children's voices. She looked out the window, but saw nothing except trees and the gravel driveway where her car sat in morning shadows. The voices came again, definitely children, but not Lila, who wouldn't be home for hours. Ava stepped onto the front porch, listening. The voices seemed to be coming from the forest, but that was impossible. There were no houses back there. No reason for children to be wandering alone in the woods. Then Buck appeared at the edge of the clearing, moving slowly and looking back over his shoulder as if encouraging someone to follow. Behind him, stepping carefully between the trees, came 5 children. Ava's first thought was that they were lost hikers, but these weren't weekend adventurers. The oldest looked to be around 14. A boy with dark hair and serious eyes who kept one protective hand on the shoulder of the smallest child. A girl who couldn't have been more than 6. Between them were 3 others, 2 girls and another boy, all wearing clothes that had seen too many washes and not enough meals. They were dirty in the way that spoke of living rough, not just playing hard. Their hair was tangled, their faces smudged with the kind of grime that didn't come off with a quick rinse. Most telling of all was the way they moved, constantly alert, ready to run, like deer that had wandered too close to a house. Buck led them to the edge of the yard, and then sat down, looking between the children and Ava, with an expression that seemed to say, "Here, I brought you something important." The oldest boy met Ava's eyes for a moment, then looked away. "Sorry, ma'am," he said, his voice carefully polite. "Buck here led us out of the woods. We were just leaving." "Wait," Ava said, stepping down from the porch. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" The children exchanged glances, a whole conversation passing between them in the space of a heartbeat. The youngest girl pressed closer to the boy, who was clearly their leader, her thumb finding its way to her mouth. "We're fine," the boy said, but his voice cracked slightly. "Come on, everybody. We need to go." "Hold on," Ava said, moving slowly so she wouldn't spook them. "You all look hungry. When's the last time you had a real meal?" That question hung in the air like a challenge. The boy's jaw tightened, pride warring with obvious need. Up close, Ava could see how thin they all were, how their clothes hung loose on frames that should have been filling out with growth and good food. "We take care of ourselves," he said finally. "I'm sure you do," Ava replied gently. "But even people who take care of themselves need help sometimes. I've got pancake mix in the kitchen and nothing else to do this morning." "What do you say?" The smallest girl tugged on the boy's sleeve and whispered something Ava couldn't hear. He looked down at her, then back at Ava, clearly torn between caution and desperation. "Just breakfast," Ava added. "No questions you don't want to answer." Buck, as if sensing the moment required intervention, walked over to the children and sat down again, leaning against the oldest boy's legs. The dog had always been a good judge of character, and his message was clear. These were good kids who needed help. "Okay," the boy said finally. "Just breakfast. They filed into the cabin like they were entering a museum, touching nothing and speaking in whispers. Ava sent them to wash up in the bathroom while she started breakfast, making enough pancakes to feed twice their number. Whatever their story was, food was clearly part of the solution. When they emerged from the bathroom, faces clean and hair somewhat tamed, Ava got her first good look at them. The oldest boy had eyes that had seen too much, but his shoulders were straight with responsibility. The two middle girls, maybe 8 and 10, stayed close together with the kind of bond that spoke of shared hardship. The third boy, around 12, had the wary alertness of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. And the little one, with her enormous dark eyes and careful way of watching every adult face, broke Ava's heart completely. "I'm Ava," she said, setting plates of pancakes on the table. "And you've already met Buck. I'm Tommy," the oldest boy said after a moment. "These are my sisters and brothers." The children fell on the food with the kind of hunger that went deeper than missing one meal. They ate in silence efficiently, saving every crumb. Ava refilled their glasses of milk twice and made another batch of pancakes without comment. Finally, when the immediate desperation had been satisfied, Tommy looked up at her. "Thank you, ma'am. We should go now." "Where?" Ava asked gently. "Just go." "We've got a place." "In the woods?" The children went very still. Tommy's hand moved protectively toward the smallest girl, and Ava saw the calculation in his eyes. How quickly could they run if they needed to? "Tommy," she said, using his name deliberately, "I need you to know that I'm not going to hurt you or turn you into anyone. But I can see that you've been taking care of your family for a while now, and that's a big responsibility for someone your age." "I'm 14, he said defensively. "I know, and you're doing a good job. But winter's coming, and these mountains get cold, really cold. And your little sister," she gestured gently toward the smallest child, who was still clutching Tommy's sleeve. "She needs more than what the woods can provide." "We can't go back," one of the middle girls spoke up suddenly, her voice fierce despite its softness. "We won't. Go back where?" Ava asked, but the children had closed ranks again, faces shuttered. Buck, who had been lying by the fireplace, suddenly stood and walked to the front door, pressing his nose against the glass. A moment later, Ava heard the distinctive rumble of the school bus engine. "That's my daughter coming home," she explained, seeing the panic flash across their faces. "Lila, she's 10. We have to go," Tommy said, already standing. "You don't have to," Ava said firmly. "But you can if you want to. The woods aren't going anywhere." The bus door opened with its characteristic wheeze, and Lila's voice carried across the yard as she called goodbye to friends. The children froze like rabbits in headlights, clearly torn between running and staying. Then Lila burst through the front door, backpack flying, and stopped dead when she saw the kitchen full of strangers. "Oh," she said, taking in the scene. "Hi, hi," the smallest girl whispered back, the first word Ava had heard her speak. And in that simple exchange, something shifted. The children relaxed fractionally, recognizing in Lila someone closer to their own experience of the world. Not an adult with unknown motivations, but a kid who might understand. "Mom," Lila said carefully, "are these the children Buck found?" Ava blinked. "How did you—" "He's been talking about them all week," Lila said matter-of-factly. "Dogs always know things before people do." "Are you staying for dinner?" The question was directed at the children, delivered with the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted that her home was safe, that food would always be available, that adults could be trusted to take care of things. Tommy looked at his siblings, then at Ava, then back at Lila's expectant face. "I guess," he said slowly, "if it's okay with your mom." "It's okay with me," Ava said, meaning it completely. That night, 5 extra sleeping bags appeared on the living room floor, borrowed from neighbors who asked no questions when Ava explained she had unexpected guests. The children huddled together even in sleep, but they stayed. Buck positioned himself between them and the door, unofficial guardian of the makeshift family that had somehow formed around Ava's kitchen table. As she lay in bed, listening to the soft sounds of children breathing, Ava realized her life had just changed again. in ways she couldn't yet fully comprehend. Tomorrow, she would need to figure out what came next. But tonight, it was enough that 5 lost children were safe and warm and fed. Sometimes grace found you whether you were ready for it or not. Morning brought the reality that 5 children didn't simply disappear with daylight. They woke early, moving quietly around the cabin like they'd learned not to make noise, gathering their few possessions, with the practiced efficiency of people who'd had to leave places quickly. Before, Ava made coffee and watched them through the kitchen window as they stood in a small cluster by the edge of the woods, clearly debating whether to stay or go. Tommy was doing most of the talking, his young face serious as he weighed options with the kind of gravity that should have belonged to someone 3 times his age. Lila joined them outside, still in her pajamas and fuzzy slippers, apparently unbothered by the fact that she was negotiating with a group of forest children before breakfast. Buck sat nearby, observing the proceedings with the patient dignity of a judge. When they all trooped back inside, Tommy cleared his throat formally. "We talked about it," he announced. "We'd like to stay for a few days if that's still okay, just until we figure out what's next." "Of course it's okay," Ava said, relief flooding through her. "But I need to know your names, all of them." "Real names?" The children exchanged glances before Tommy nodded. "I'm Thomas, but everyone calls me Tommy. This is Rebecca." He gestured to the oldest girl, maybe 12, with serious dark eyes and carefully braided hair. "And that's Emma." Emma appeared to be about 8, with a gap-toothed smile that transformed her whole face when she let it show. "I'm Jesse," the middle boy said, around 10 years old, with freckles scattered across his nose like stars. "And that's our baby sister, Grace." Grace, the smallest at maybe 6 years old, pressed closer to Tommy and gave Ava a small wave. She had the kind of enormous eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. "How long have you been in the woods?" Ava asked gently. 2 months, Rebecca answered. "Since July." July. Ava felt something cold settle in her stomach. These children had been surviving outdoors through the heat of summer and into early fall, which meant they'd been planning for winter. No child should have to plan for winter in the wilderness. Where did you come from before that? The shutters came down again. Tommy's jaw tightened, and he moved slightly in front of his siblings. "Does it matter?" "It matters because I need to understand what we're dealing with," Ava said honestly. "I want to help you, but I can't do that if I don't know what you're running from." "Foster care," Emma said suddenly, ignoring the sharp look Tommy shot her. "We were in foster care, but they wanted to split us up." "Emma!" Tommy warned. "She's nice," Emma protested. "And I'm tired of keeping secrets. I'm tired of being scared all the time." Ava's heart clenched. These weren't throwaway kids or runaways acting out. These were siblings who'd chosen the woods over the system because the system had failed them. "How long were you in care?" she asked. 8 months, Rebecca said quietly. "After Mom and Dad died in the car accident." The room went very quiet. Lila, who had been eating cereal at the counter, stopped mid-chew. Even Buck seemed to sense the weight of this revelation. "The first family was okay," Tommy continued reluctantly, "but they could only take 3 of us. Social services said they'd find a place for all of us together, but it never happened. Then they moved us to different families, and Grace," his voice caught slightly, "Grace stopped talking, stopped eating. She was getting sick from missing us." "So you ran," Ava said. "So we ran," he confirmed. "The night before, they were going to move Grace to another county. We couldn't let them take her away from us." Ava looked at these 5 children, siblings who'd chosen to live in the wilderness rather than be separated, and felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. They'd kept themselves together through sheer determination and love, sleeping rough and scavenging food because staying together mattered more than comfort or safety. "Show me," she said. "Show you what?" "Where you've been living. I need to see what you built out there." Tommy looked suspicious. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to help you figure out what comes next, I need to understand what you've already survived." After breakfast, they led her into the woods, following trails only they could see. Buck came too, clearly familiar with the route. About half a mile from the cabin, hidden in a grove of pine trees. They'd created something that was part shelter, in part fortress. They'd strung a blue tarp between trees to create a lean-to, reinforced with branches and pine boughs. Underneath were 5 sleeping bags arranged in a circle around a carefully constructed fire pit. Their possessions were minimal but organized. A few changes of clothes and garbage bags, some dented pots and pans, empty cans and bottles that had held food and water, but it was the small touches that broke Ava's heart. Someone had arranged smooth stones around the fire pit in a careful pattern. Emma had made a wreath of pine cones and hung it from a low branch. Grace had a small collection of interesting rocks arranged on a flat stump like a tiny altar, and tucked under one corner of the tarp, carefully protected from weather, was a torn piece of paper with a child's drawing on it. A house with stick figures standing in front, 5 small people and 2 larger ones, all holding hands under a smiling sun. Tommy saw her looking at it and his face flushed red. "Grace drew that," he said defensively. "It's our family." From before, Ava picked up the drawing carefully, seeing how it had been folded and unfolded many times, how the paper was soft with handling. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. "They were good parents," Rebecca said quietly. "Mom made pancakes every Sunday, and Dad taught us how to skip stones at the lake. They would have hated us being split up. They would have been proud of how you took care of each other," Ava said firmly. They showed her the rest of their setup, how they'd figured out water collection and food storage, where they went to wash clothes in a stream, the elaborate system of signals they used to stay in contact when foraging separately. It was impressive and heartbreaking in equal measure. "Winter would have been hard," Tommy said, as if reading her thoughts. "We knew that, but we figured we'd rather be cold together than warm apart." On the walk back to the cabin, Ava found herself calculating. 5 children meant 5 times the food, 5 times the clothes, 5 times the everything. It meant school enrollment and medical checkups and questions from neighbors and officials. It meant her quiet mountain refuge becoming something else. Entirely. It also meant laughter in the mornings and homework help in the evenings and birthday, parties and Christmas mornings and all the beautiful chaos that came with a house full of children. "What are you thinking?" Tommy asked as they reached the cabin's clearing. Ava looked at these 5 children who'd chosen love over safety, family over comfort, each other over everything else. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that your parents raised you right, and I'm thinking they'd want you to have more than just survival." "What does that mean?" "It means we need to figure out how to make this permanent." The children stopped walking. Grace looked up at Tommy with those enormous eyes, hope and fear warring in her expression. "You can't just decide that," Rebecca said practically. "There are laws, social services. They'll come looking for us eventually. Then we'll figure out how to work with the laws instead of around them," Ava said. "There has to be a way to keep families together when that's what's best for everyone. And if there isn't?" Ava looked at each of their faces, Tommy with his premature responsibility, Rebecca with her careful intelligence, Emma with her dimpled hope, Jesse with his quiet strength, Grace with her enormous capacity for love. "Then we'll make a way," she said. That afternoon, while the children helped Lila with her homework at the kitchen table, Ava sat on the front porch with her laptop and began researching kinship care, guardianship laws, and how a single woman with limited resources might legally become responsible for 5 children who weren't related to her by blood. The information was overwhelming and contradictory, but one thing became clear: it wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't be fast. But it also wasn't impossible. As the sun set behind the mountains and the sounds of 6 children arguing good-naturedly about math problems drifted through the screen door, Ava realized she'd already made her choice. These children had fought to stay together, and she was going to fight to help them do it. Buck padded out onto the porch and settled beside her chair with a satisfied sigh, as if to say his work here was done. He'd brought her exactly what she needed, even if she hadn't known she needed it. "Good boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Very good boy." By the end of the first week, Ava had made the decision that felt as natural as breathing and as terrifying as jumping off a cliff. The children would stay, not just for a few days, but for as long as they needed, which, if she was being honest with herself, she hoped would be forever. The practical realities hit her like a truck on Monday morning when she realized she needed to make a trip to town for supplies. 6 children ate significantly more than 2, and they'd burned through her grocery budget in 3 days. More pressing was the fact that if these children were going to be staying, they needed things: clothes that fit, school supplies, basic necessities that came with housing 5 additional people. "We can't all go together," she told Tommy over breakfast. "It'll draw too much attention." "We could stay here," he offered, but she caught the flash of anxiety in his eyes. These children had learned not to trust that adults would come back. "No," she said firmly. "We stick together. But we need to be smart about it." She'd been thinking about this problem for days. A single woman suddenly shopping for 6 children would raise questions in a town small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business. But a family passing through, maybe visiting relatives, getting supplies before heading back to wherever they came from, that was different. "Here's what we're going to do," she said, gathering them around the kitchen table. "We're going to town as a family. If anyone asks, you're my nieces and nephews visiting for a few weeks while your parents sort out some business. Can you handle that?" The children nodded solemnly. They'd clearly had practice at keeping stories straight. "And," she continued, reaching into her purse for the envelope of cash she'd been saving for emergencies, "we're going shopping. Real shopping. For things you need." Grace's eyes went wide. Emma bounced in her chair. Even Tommy, who'd been carrying the weight of being responsible for everyone, allowed himself a small smile. The trip to town revealed just how much these children had been doing without. In the clothing section of the local discount store, they stood paralyzed by choice, unable to process having options after months of wearing the same few outfits. Grace clung to a soft pink sweater like it was made of gold. Jessie stared at a display of sneakers with the kind of longing usually reserved for Christmas morning. "Pick what you need," Ava said gently. "And some things you want too. We don't need much," Rebecca said automatically, the response of a child who'd learned not to ask for things. "Need and want are different things," Ava replied. "You need underwear and socks and clothes that fit. You want that purple backpack and those books, and Emma wants that stuffed elephant. Both matter." It took 2 hours and 3 shopping carts, but they left the store with everything from toothbrushes to winter coats to the stuffed elephant that Emma clutched like a long-lost friend. At the grocery store, Ava let them help plan meals, watching them slowly accept that yes, they could have both cereal and pancake mix, both apples and cookies, but it was at the pharmacy, picking up vitamins and first aid supplies, that their carefully maintained cover story hit its first snag. Ava Jenkins. The voice belonged to Martha Henley, who ran the local diner and had already hired Ava for weekend shifts. "And who are all these lovely children?" "Family," Ava said smoothly, hoping her voice sounded more casual than she felt. "My sister's kids, visiting for a while." Martha's eyes moved over the children with the sharp attention of someone who'd raised 5 of her own. She took in their still too thin faces, the way they clustered protectively around each other, Grace's death grip on Ava's hand. "Well, aren't they precious?" she said finally. "How long are they staying?" "We're not sure yet," Tommy answered before Ava could speak. "Depends on when our parents get back from their business trip." It was a good answer, delivered with just the right mix of childlike honesty and vagueness. Martha smiled and moved on, but Ava caught her glancing back at them as they finished their shopping. On the drive home, the children were quiet, processing their first real venture into the world as part of Ava's family. "Do you think she believed us?" Rebecca asked. "I think she's smart enough to know there's more to the story," Ava said honestly. "But I also think she's kind enough not to push for details until we're ready to share them. What happens when we're not ready?" It was a question Ava had been dreading. "I don't know," she admitted. "But we'll figure it out when we get there." That evening, While the children sorted through their new belongings, with the reverence of people who'd had very little for a very long time, Ava discovered something that stopped her cold. Hidden in the bottom of Tommy's old backpack, wrapped carefully in a plastic bag, was a coffee can with a tight-fitting lid. Inside were $47 in crumpled bills and loose change. "Tommy," she called softly, holding up the can. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, took one look at what she was holding, and his face flushed red. "That's our emergency money," he said defensively. "In case we needed to run again. How did you get it?" "Odd jobs. Returning bottles and cans. Jesse found a lost wallet once and turned it in, and the lady gave him a reward." His voice was proud despite his embarrassment. "We were saving it for winter supplies." Ava stared at this child who'd been taking responsibility for 4 siblings, who'd been working odd jobs and collecting bottles to keep them alive, who'd been planning for a winter he shouldn't have had to face. $47 represented weeks of effort, sacrifice, and impossible maturity. "You know what this tells me?" she said finally. Tommy's shoulders tensed, waiting for criticism or judgment. "It tells me your parents raised 5 of the most resourceful, responsible children I've ever met. And it tells me you've been carrying a load that's too heavy for anyone, let alone someone who's 14 years old." She held the can out to him. "This is yours, all of it. But maybe now you can save it for something you want, instead of something you need to survive." Tommy stared at the can, then at her, clearly struggling with emotions too big for words. "You really mean it? About us staying?" "I really mean it, even though we're not your real family." Ava thought about this question, about all the ways family could be defined. Blood was one way, but it wasn't the only way. Love was another. Choice was a third. Commitment was a fourth. "Tommy," she said gently, "I've been thinking about that. Your real family is your parents, and they'll always be your real family. But family isn't just about who gave birth to you. Sometimes it's about who chooses to love you and stick around when things get hard. So what does that make you?" Ava smiled. "I guess it makes me your family too. A different kind, but still real." The next morning brought their first real test of how this new arrangement would work in practice. Lila had to go to school, and Ava had to work her shift at the diner, which left the question of what to do with 5 children who officially didn't exist. "We can take care of ourselves," Tommy said automatically. "I know you can," Ava replied, "but you shouldn't have to anymore. Rebecca, how do you feel about being in charge for a few hours? Just until I get home from work?" Rebecca straightened with the responsibility. "I can do that. Emma, you're Rebecca's assistant. Jesse, you're in charge of making sure Grace isn't scared. Tommy, you're the backup for everything. But you don't have to be the only one making decisions anymore." It was a small thing, redistributing responsibility among them, but Ava could see how it lifted some of the weight from Tommy's shoulders. He was still protective, still watchful, but for the first time since she'd met him, he looked like what he was, a 14-year-old boy instead of a miniature adult. Her shift at the diner passed slowly, complicated by Martha's casual questions about her nieces and nephews, and how long they'd be staying. Ava stuck to the story they'd agreed on, but she could feel Martha's curiosity like a weight on her shoulders. When she got home, she found all 5 children in the living room, homework spread across the coffee table as Rebecca helped Grace with reading, while Emma and Jesse worked on math problems Tommy had created for them. "How did it go?" she asked. "Good," Rebecca said, but there was tension in her voice. "Except a car came up the driveway around noon. A county car." Ava's blood went cold. "What kind of county car?" "Had a seal on the side. Official looking. A lady got out and looked around, but we were hiding in the woods by then." "Did she knock on the door?" "Yeah, and she left a card stuck in the door frame." Ava found the card where Rebecca said it would be. A business card for Janet Morrison. Child Protective Services, with a handwritten note on the back. "Please call me when you get a chance. I'd like to discuss some children who may be in the area." The card felt like ice in her hands. Someone had seen them, put pieces together, made a phone call. The careful balance they'd been building over the past week was already starting to crumble. "What does it mean?" Tommy asked, reading over her shoulder. It means someone noticed 5 children who shouldn't exist, Ava said honestly. And now we need to decide what we're going to do about it. The children gathered around her, fear and determination warring in their faces. They'd run once to stay together. They were prepared to do it again. We could leave tonight, Tommy said quietly. Go deeper into the mountains. We know how to survive now. You do, Ava agreed. But you shouldn't have to. And winter's coming, which means survival gets a lot harder in a few months. So what do we do? Ava looked at these 5 children who'd already been through too much, who'd fought so hard to stay together, who deserved stability and safety and the chance to just be kids again. We fight, she said simply. We find a way to make this legal and permanent. Because running is surviving, but staying is living. And you all deserve to live. That night, after the children were asleep, Ava sat at her kitchen table with Janet Morrison's business card, her laptop, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She researched guardianship laws and kinship care and emergency custody arrangements until her eyes burned and her head ached. But somewhere in all that legal language and bureaucratic procedure, she found something that looked like hope. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be fast, but there were ways to make this work, ways to fight for these children that didn't involve running or hiding or splitting them up. Buck padded into the kitchen and settled at her feet, warm and solid and reassuring. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pine trees, and from the living room came the soft sounds of 6 children breathing safely in their sleep. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight they were all together under one roof, and sometimes that was enough to build a future on. Ava called Janet Morrison the next morning, her hands steady, despite the coffee cup trembling on the table beside her. The children sat in the living room, pretending to focus on books, while actually listening to every word of the conversation that would determine their future. Miss Morrison? This is Ava Jenkins. I understand you were looking for some children. Miss Jenkins, thank you for calling. Janet's voice was professional but not unkind. I received a report about 5 children who may be staying in your area. I wanted to follow up and make sure everyone is safe. They're safe, Ava said carefully. They're with me. There was a pause. And what is your relationship to these children? This was the moment where everything could fall apart. Ava took a breath and chose honesty. I don't have a legal relationship to them yet, but I'm hoping to change that. I see, Miss Jenkins, I think we need to meet in person. Would this afternoon be convenient? Of course. After she hung up, Ava found 5 pairs of eyes watching her with the kind of intensity that came from having your fate decided by adults too many times. She's coming here, Ava said. This afternoon. Are we running? Tommy asked, already calculating distances and escape routes. No, Ava said firmly. We're going to tell the truth. All of it. The truth, it turned out, was complicated. Over the next 2 hours, sitting around the kitchen table with Janet Morrison, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and sensible shoes, Ava listened to these children tell their story from the beginning. Their parents had died 8 months ago in a car accident during a family vacation. Mark and Jennifer Patterson had been good parents, stable parents, the kind who coached Little League and volunteered at school fundraisers. But they'd had no living relatives able to take 5 children, and the state's first priority had been finding immediate placement. Not keeping siblings together. The Hendersons were nice, Rebecca said, speaking directly to Janet. But they could only take 3 of us. You said you'd find a place for all of us together, but you never did. We tried, Janet said gently. Finding placement for 5 siblings is extremely difficult, so you split us up anyway, Emma said, her voice flat. Grace stopped eating. She stopped talking. She cried every night. Janet's expression was pained. We were working on a solution. For how long? Tommy's voice carried an edge of anger he'd been holding back for months. Grace was getting sick, real sick. And you were going to move her even further away. So you ran, Janet said. So we saved our family, Tommy corrected. Ava watched this social worker taking in these 5 children. Clean now. Well-fed. Clearly cared for, but still carrying the wariness of people who'd learned the system could fail them. Janet's training told her one thing, but her heart was clearly telling her another. "Ms. Jenkins," Janet said finally, "what exactly are you proposing?" "I want to apply for guardianship," Ava said. "Emergency guardianship initially, then permanent if that's what's best for the children. You understand this is highly unusual. You have no prior relationship with these children, no family connection. Neither did the foster families you placed them with," Ava pointed out. "The difference is, I want all 5 of them, together." Janet was quiet for a long moment, studying the children who sat around the table with their hands clasped tightly together. Grace had moved to sit on Tommy's lap, and he held her with the protective instinct of someone who'd been her primary caregiver for months. "The children would need to be evaluated," she said finally. "Medically, psychologically. We'd need background checks, home studies, financial assessments. Whatever it takes," Ava said, "and in the meantime, they stay here, where they're safe and together and getting what they need." Janet looked around the cabin, clean but not fancy, comfortable but not luxurious. She saw the makeshift sleeping arrangements in the living room, the overflowing laundry basket, the homework scattered across surfaces, all the beautiful chaos of a house suddenly full of children. There are regulations about overcrowding, about sleeping arrangements. "Then help me figure out how to do this right," Ava said. "But don't split them up again, please." Later, after Janet had left with promises to make some phone calls and see what could be arranged, the children sat quietly in the living room while Ava made dinner. The weight of uncertainty hung over the house like a storm cloud. "What if she says no?" Grace whispered, speaking directly to Ava for the first time. "Then we'll figure out another way," Ava said, kneeling down to Grace's level. "I promise you, sweetheart, I will not let anyone separate your family." That evening, while helping Jesse with his math homework, Ava discovered something that made her stop cold. In his notebook, carefully penciled in the margins, were dates and calculations. "Jesse, what are these numbers?" He looked embarrassed. "How long we've been in each place?" The group home was 43 days. The Hendersons were 67 days. The McKinneys were 29 days before they said they couldn't handle Emma's nightmares. Ava stared at this 10-year-old boy who'd been keeping track of temporary placements like a business ledger. "Why do you write it down?" "So I remember how long places last," he said simply. "So I can tell when it's time to start getting ready to leave again." "Jesse," Ava said gently, "how many days has it been here?" He consulted his careful notes. 16 days. "And you're getting ready to leave?" He shrugged, but she could see the pain in his young face. "Places don't usually last longer than 2 months. Adults get tired of us." That night, Ava found herself going through a box of things Uncle Raymond had left in the bedroom closet. Most of it was ordinary. Old bills, hardware store receipts, a few family photos she didn't recognize. But at the bottom of the box was something that made her heart stop. A photograph of 5 children, maybe taken 20 years ago, standing in front of the very cabin where she now lived. They were dirty, thin, clearly homeless. And on the back, in Raymond's handwriting, "The Morrison kids, winter of 2003, stayed until they could find their aunt in California. Good kids who just needed someone to believe in them. Morrison." The same last name as the social worker who'd visited today. Ava studied the photograph more carefully, focusing on the adult man standing slightly behind the children. Younger, with darker hair, but unmistakably the same kind eyes and patient smile. Uncle Raymond had done this before. He'd taken in lost children, kept them safe, helped them find their way to family. The cabin had been a way station for kids who needed someone to care about them. And somehow, Janet Morrison knew. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. "Miss Jenkins, this is Janet Morrison. I've spoken with my supervisor and reviewed your preliminary application. We'd like to arrange emergency temporary guardianship while we process the paperwork for something more permanent." Ava sank into a kitchen chair, relief making her legs weak. "What does that mean?" "It means the children can stay with you legally while we work through the system. It means they can enroll in school, see doctors, have stability while we figure out the long-term solution." "And what's the long-term solution?" "If you're serious about this, If the evaluations go well, if the children want to stay, and it's clear they do, then we'll work toward permanent guardianship. It won't be easy, and it won't be fast, but it's possible." After she hung up, Ava sat in her kitchen for a long moment, processing the fact that they'd just cleared the first major hurdle. The children could stay. Legally, officially, they could stay. She found them in the living room, clustered around Buck, who had become their unofficial therapy dog. Six Faces looked up at her expectantly. "We won," she said simply. The celebration was immediate and chaotic. Emma burst into tears of relief. Rebecca hugged Jesse so hard he squeaked. Grace launched herself at Ava's legs, and Tommy, serious, responsible Tommy, smiled with his whole face for the first time since she'd met him. "For how long?" he asked, ever practical. "For as long as it takes to make it permanent," Ava said. "And if I have anything to say about it, that means forever." That afternoon, she made another discovery that felt like a gift from Uncle Raymond himself. Hidden behind a loose board in the kitchen wall, exactly where his letter had said she might find important papers, was an envelope with her name on it. Inside was a second will, more recent than the one the lawyer had shown her, and a letter that made everything clear. "Ava," it read, "if you're reading this, then Buck found the children who needed you. He always was smarter than the rest of us about these things. This cabin has seen a lot of lost children over the years, kids who needed a safe place to land while the adults figured out how to help them. I always hoped someday it would be a real home for children who needed one permanently. The account at First National has more money in it than I told you about. Enough to build bedrooms, buy school clothes, pay for college if that's what they want. The new will makes sure none of that money can be taken away from you or the children, no matter what happens. Use it to build the family I always hoped would live in this place. With love and hope, Uncle Raymond." Ava stared at the letter, then at the bank information that showed an account with enough money to transform not just the cabin, but all their lives. Uncle Raymond had been planning for this day, preparing for the possibility that she would find children who needed her as much as she needed them. He'd given her not just a house, but the means to make it a true home for as many children as it could hold. As evening fell, and the sounds of 6 children getting ready for bed filled the cabin with warmth and life, Ava realized that everything that had happened, inheriting the cabin, Buck finding the children, even Janet Morrison's visit, had been building toward this moment. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were becoming a family. 3 weeks into their new legal arrangement, Ava made a discovery that connected everything in ways she never could have imagined. While helping Buck with his arthritis medication, the old dog was slowing down, but still insisted on his morning forest patrols. She noticed something about his collar that she'd never paid attention to before. The leather was old and worn, but when she turned it over to check the fit, she found an engraved tag she'd somehow missed. "Buck Patterson," it read, followed by a phone number she didn't recognize and an address in Tennessee. Patterson, the same last name as the children's parents. "Tommy," she called, her voice carefully neutral. "Can you come here for a minute?" He appeared in the kitchen doorway, always alert to changes in tone that might signal trouble. "What was your father's full name?" she asked. "Mark Anthony Patterson. Why?" Ava held up Buck's collar, showing him the tag. Tommy's face went white, then flushed red with an emotion she couldn't identify. "Buck was Dad's dog," he whispered, "before he married Mom. Dad found him as a puppy, abandoned on the side of a road. They were best friends for years. What happened to him when your parents got married?" "Mom was allergic," Rebecca said, joining them in the kitchen. "Dad gave Buck to his Uncle Raymond so he could visit whenever we came to the mountains. We used to come here every summer when we were little." The pieces clicked into place with an almost audible snap. Uncle Raymond was Mark Patterson's uncle, which made him the children's great-uncle. Buck had belonged to their father. The cabin had been their summer refuge before tragedy tore their world apart. "You've been here before," Ava said, understanding flooding through her. "Every July," Emma said, appearing with Grace and Jessie behind her. for 2 weeks every summer until Dad died. We helped Uncle Raymond fix the roof one year, and he taught us how to fish in the creek. He always said if anything ever happened to Mom and Dad, we should remember that the mountains take care of their own, Grace added softly. Ava stared at these 5 children, who weren't strangers at all, but Uncle Raymond's family. Buck's family. Children who'd played in these very rooms and slept under this very roof and belonged here in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Did social services know about Uncle Raymond?" she asked. Tommy shook his head. He wasn't on any official paperwork. Dad never bothered with legal stuff for family visits, and after the accident, everything happened so fast. They asked about relatives, but we were so confused and scared, we didn't think to mention him. Plus, Rebecca added quietly, we thought he was dead. Dad said something once about Uncle Raymond being sick, and we hadn't seen him in 2 years. Buck, as if sensing he was the center of attention, padded over to the children and sat down among them with a contented sigh. He'd been trying to bring them home all along, not just to any safe place, but to their place, the cabin where they'd spent the happiest weeks of their childhood. "This changes things," Ava said, mind racing through implications. "If Uncle Raymond was your great-uncle, if this cabin was part of your family history, it strengthens the legal case for you staying here." "Does it change things for you?" Tommy asked, and there was vulnerability in his voice that broke her heart. "Now that you know we're actually related to Uncle Raymond?" Ava looked at this boy who'd been carrying adult responsibilities for months, who still couldn't quite believe that adults might choose to keep him and his siblings, instead of finding reasons to send them away. "Tommy," she said gently, "it doesn't matter to me if you're Uncle Raymond's family or strangers Buck found in the woods. What matters is that you're here now, and you belong here now, and I love you now, all of you." The legal implications became clear when Janet Morrison visited again the following week for their first official check-in. When Ava explained about the family connection, Janet's whole demeanor shifted. "This is significant," she said, reviewing the new information. "Kinship care has priority in placement decisions. The fact that you're caring for children who have an existing relationship with your property, your uncle, changes the entire legal framework." "What does that mean practically?" "It means we can fast-track the guardianship process. It means the court will view this as children returning to family, rather than strangers taking in unrelated minors. It means," Janet smiled, "that barring any major complications, these children can stay exactly where they are." That evening, Ava called a family meeting around the kitchen table, all 6 children, because Lila was as much a part of this family as the others now, sat with paper and pencils while she outlined what needed to happen next. "We need to make some decisions together," she said. "About school, about bedrooms, about how we want this family to work." "Real decisions?" Emma asked. "Or adult decisions where you ask what we think, but then do what you were going to do anyway?" "Real decisions," Ava promised. "This affects all of us, so all of us get a say." They spent 2 hours planning their life together. School enrollment would happen Monday. All 5 children would attend the local elementary and middle schools, which meant morning chaos and afternoon homework help and parent-teacher conferences. The cabin would need modifications, turning the screened porch into a proper bedroom, building bunk beds, creating study spaces for 6 children with different needs. But the most important discussion was about the rules that would govern their new family. "No lying," Tommy said immediately. "We tell each other the truth, even when it's hard." "No one gets left behind," Rebecca added. "If one of us is in trouble, all of us help." "Family dinners," Lila contributed. "Every night, if possible. That's when families talk about their day." "Chores for everyone," Jessie said practically. "If we're all living here, we all help take care of here. And no one has to be perfect," Grace said softly. "Sometimes people make mistakes, but families forgive each other." Emma suggested movie nights, and Rebecca wanted a family garden, and Tommy thought they should learn how to maintain the cabin together. By the end of the evening, they had a charter written in 6 different handwritings on notebook paper, their official family constitution. Ava watched these children taking ownership of their life together, making plans that stretched months and years into the future, and realized they'd crossed an invisible line somewhere during the conversation. They weren't visitors anymore, or temporary guests, or children in placement. They were home. The next morning brought their first real test as a legal family unit. School enrollment required paperwork, medical records, proof of guardianship, and explanations about why 5 children with the same last name had suddenly appeared in Ava's custody. The school secretary, Mrs. Campbell, was patient but thorough. "Now these children are your late uncle's great-nieces and nephews." "That's right," Ava said, grateful for the simple truth of it. "And they'll be living with you permanently?" "Yes, ma'am." "Well," Mrs. Campbell said, stamping forms with practiced efficiency, "we're glad to have them. The Patterson children were always a pleasure during their summer visits." "You remember them?" "Oh, yes. Their father, Mark, was one of our graduates, you know. Class of 1995. Good family, the Pattersons. Such a tragedy about the accident. As they left the school with enrollment packets and supply lists, Tommy walked beside Ava with something approaching peace in his expression. "It feels different," he said quietly. "Having people know who we are instead of pretending to be someone else. Better different, or worse different. Better," he said definitely. "Like we can stop running now." That afternoon, while the children explored the school playground and made tentative connections with potential classmates, Ava sat in her car and called the contractor whose number Janet Morrison had given her. "I need to add bedrooms to a cabin," she explained, "for 5 children who are going to be living there permanently. How soon do you need it done?" Ava looked through the windshield at 6 children playing together. Her children now, legally and emotionally, and in every way that mattered, and smiled. "As soon as possible," she said. "We're building a family here, and families need room to grow." The work began the following Monday. The sound of hammers and saws became the soundtrack to their first weeks as an official family, the cabin expanding. Around them, like it was stretching to accommodate all the love and laughter that had suddenly filled it. Buck, now wearing a new collar with Buck Jenkins Patterson engraved on the tag, supervised the construction from his favorite spot by the fireplace, occasionally wandering over to check the workers' progress with the authority of someone who'd been waiting years for this particular family to come home. 2 months into what Ava had begun thinking of as their real life, a phone call threatened to unravel everything they'd built. She was in the middle of helping Grace with reading homework when her cell phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Miss Jenkins, this is David Mitchell, attorney for the Patterson estate." Ava's blood went cold. Estate meant legal complications, and legal complications meant potential threats to the children's placement with her. "I'm calling regarding the 5 Patterson children currently in your care. We need to meet as soon as possible to discuss some developments regarding their inheritance." "Their what?" "It's complicated, Ms. Jenkins. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? And please, don't bring the children. Not yet." That evening, after the children were asleep, Ava sat at the kitchen table, trying to imagine what new crisis was about to disrupt their carefully constructed peace. She'd thought all the legal hurdles were behind them. The emergency guardianship was in place. The permanent guardianship paperwork was progressing smoothly. The children were thriving in school and therapy. What could an estate attorney possibly want now? The law office in town was small and practical, like everything else in their mountain community. David Mitchell was younger than Ava had expected, with kind eyes and the sort of careful manner that suggested he dealt with complicated family situations regularly. "Ms. Jenkins, thank you for coming. What I'm about to tell you may come as a shock. Just tell me," Ava said. "Are the children's placements at risk?" "On the contrary," he said, opening a thick file folder. "The children are about to become quite wealthy." Ava stared at him. "I'm sorry, what?" Mark and Jennifer Patterson had substantial life insurance policies through their employers. They also owned rental properties in 3 states and had significant investment accounts. The total estate is valued at approximately $1.2 million. The number hit Ava like a physical blow. That's impossible. They were struggling financially. That's why the children ended up in foster care instead of with family. No one could afford to take them all. That's what everyone believed, David said carefully. But it wasn't true. The estate was tied up in probate because Mark and Jennifer died without updated wills. Their original wills, written before Grace was born, didn't account for 5 children. The state assumed there were no significant assets, but there are significant assets. Enough to ensure all 5 children can attend college, buy homes, have financial security for the rest of their lives. Ava's mind reeled. Why are you telling me this now? Why didn't this come out months ago? Because, David said, his expression growing complicated, there's a problem, a legal problem, that affects the children's guardianship arrangement with you. Here it was. The crisis she'd been waiting for, the shoe she'd known would eventually drop. Mark Patterson's parents have been located. The words hit Ava like ice water. His parents are alive, very much alive, and very interested in claiming custody of their grandchildren. They've been living in Alaska for the past 15 years, completely out of touch with Mark's life. They didn't even know he died until the estate attorney tracked them down last month. And now they want the children. Along with control of the inheritance until the children reach majority. Ava felt the world tilting underneath her. Can they do that? Just show up after 8 months and claim children they've never met? Legally, biological grandparents have strong claims to custody, especially when significant inheritance is involved. The Pattersons are already filing motions to reverse your guardianship and gain custody of all 5 children. Do the children know? Not yet, but they will soon. The Pattersons are flying in from Alaska next week to meet them and begin the custody process. Ava drove home in a fog of disbelief and rage. 8 months. 8 months these children had been struggling in foster care, sleeping in the woods, fighting to stay together, while their biological grandparents were completely oblivious to their existence. And now, when the children had finally found stability and safety, these strangers wanted to swoop in and claim them. That evening, Ava found herself going through a box of things Uncle Raymond had left in the bedroom closet. Most of it was ordinary. Old bills, hardware store receipts, a few family photos she didn't recognize. But at the bottom of the box was something that made her heart stop. An envelope with her name written across the front in Uncle Raymond's familiar handwriting. But the postmark was recent, less than a week old. Inside was a letter and a set of legal documents that made her hands shake as she read them. Ava, the letter began. If you're reading this, then the children have found their way home and the Pattersons have made their move. I've been expecting this day for months. Mark's father, William Patterson, is my nephew, my sister's boy. He and Mark had a falling out over Jennifer, and William never forgave his son for choosing love over family approval. When Mark died, I knew William would eventually surface, especially if he learned about the inheritance. I've been preparing for this possibility since the day you first called about the cabin. The enclosed documents establish a trust fund in your name for the care and education of Mark's children. The money cannot be touched by anyone else, including the Pattersons, and it comes with specific instructions that the children remain in your custody as long as that placement serves their best interests. William is my nephew, but you are my choice. Fight for these children, Ava. They deserve better than grandparents who show up only when money is involved. With all my love and faith in you, Uncle Raymond. Ava stared at the legal documents through tears. She didn't remember starting to cry. Uncle Raymond had known this day would come. He'd planned for it, prepared for it, set up legal protections that would give her the tools to fight for the children. The trust fund was substantial, separate from the children's inheritance, specifically designated for their care while in her custody. But more importantly, the legal language established Raymond's explicit wish that the children remain with her, adding weight to her guardianship that even biological grandparents would have trouble overturning. When David Mitchell called later that morning, His voice was much more optimistic. "Miss Jenkins, I've just received some very interesting documents from Raymond Patterson's estate attorney. It seems your uncle was quite thorough in his planning. What does this mean for the children?" "It means we have a much stronger legal foundation to contest the Pattersons' custody claim. Raymond's trust establishes clear intent regarding the children's placement, and it provides financial resources for their care that removes any question about your ability to provide for them. Can we win?" "I think we have an excellent chance, especially given the children's ages and their clear preference to remain with you." The Pattersons arrived on a Tuesday morning, driving a rented SUV up the mountain road like invaders approaching a fortress. Ava watched from the kitchen window as they parked and sat in their car for several minutes, studying the cabin. William Patterson was a tall man in his 70s with silver hair and rigid posture that spoke of military background. His wife Dorothy was elegantly dressed in clothes, clearly meant for boardrooms rather than mountain cabins. They both carried themselves with the authority of people accustomed to getting their way. Ava met them on the front porch, flanked by the children who'd insisted on being part of this first meeting. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson," she said politely.
"I'm Ava Jenkins."
"Ms. Jenkins." William's voice was crisp, professional. "We're here to see our grandchildren." The meeting was stilted, awkward, filled with tension that comes when strangers try to claim family relationships that don't really exist. The Pattersons asked polite questions about school and activities, but their discomfort with the cabin's rustic simplicity was obvious. Grace pressed close to Tommy throughout the visit, clearly overwhelmed by these formal strangers. Emma answered questions in monosyllables. Rebecca watched everything with sharp intelligence. "We live in Anchorage," Dorothy said eventually, smiling with forced cheer. "We have a lovely home with plenty of room for everyone. Excellent schools, cultural opportunities." "Alaska?" Grace whispered, the word carrying all her fear and confusion. "We like these mountains," Emma said flatly. "We want to stay here." "Of course you feel that way now," William said. "But your children. You don't understand all the factors involved." "What factors?" Rebecca asked, and Ava heard the edge in her voice that meant trouble. "Your parents left you a substantial inheritance, children. Money that needs to be managed by responsible adults until you're old enough to handle it yourselves." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Ava saw the moment the children understood. Their grandparents weren't here because they'd suddenly developed feelings for family they'd ignored for years. They were here because money was involved. "You want our inheritance," Grace said, her 6-year-old voice cutting through adult pretense with brutal clarity. The visit ended with thinly veiled threats about legal proceedings. After the Pattersons drove away, the children clustered around Ava in the kitchen. "Are they going to take us?" Grace asked, climbing into Ava's lap. "Not if I can help it," Ava said, holding her close. "Not if we fight together." That evening, Tommy came to Ava with something she'd never seen before, a letter written in his father's handwriting. "I found this in my backpack," he said. "I forgot I had it. Dad wrote it to me right before the accident for my birthday." The letter was brief but devastating in its clarity. "Tommy, you're going to be 14 soon, practically a man. I need you to know that if anything ever happens to your mom and me, your job is to keep your brothers and sisters together, no matter what. Family isn't just about blood, it's about people who choose to love each other through everything. Uncle Raymond understands that. If you ever need help, remember that the mountains take care of their own. Happy birthday, son. I'm proud of the man you're becoming. Love, Dad." Ava read the letter twice, her hands shaking. "Tommy, this changes everything." "I know," he said. Dad knew his parents. He knew what kind of people they were. That's why he told me to keep us together no matter what. We need to show this to our lawyer. Will it help?" Ava thought about the legal battle ahead, about biological rights versus children's best interests, about the power of a dead father's explicit instructions. "It's going to help a lot," she said. "Your dad just gave us the strongest weapon we could have asked for." That night, as the children slept peacefully, perhaps for one of the last times before the legal storm truly began, Ava sat on the front porch with Buck at her feet, and Uncle Raymond's letter in her hands. The mountains stretched out before them, dark and protective in the moonlight. This battle wasn't just about custody or inheritance. It was about honoring the wishes of parents who'd understood what family really meant, and about proving that love and choice could be stronger than blood and obligation. The Pattersons had money and lawyers and biological claims. But Ava had something more powerful. She had the truth, and she had a family worth fighting for. The custody hearing was scheduled for Friday morning, which gave them exactly 1 week to prepare for the fight of their lives. Ava spent Monday morning in David Mitchell's office, reviewing strategy and trying to understand how 5 children who'd never wanted for love might be forced to leave the only home they'd known in over a year. The Pattersons have hired Jameson, Burke and Associates, David said, sliding a business card across his desk. They're not local. Flew in from Denver specifically for this case. That tells us they're taking this very seriously. What's our strongest argument? The children's preference, combined with the stability of their current placement and Raymond's explicit wishes in the trust documents. But Ava, I need you to understand. Biological grandparents have significant legal advantages, especially when there are questions about financial resources. What kind of questions? David hesitated. The Pattersons are arguing that you're not equipped to manage the children's inheritance properly, that you took them in without fully understanding the financial responsibilities involved. Are they saying I'm after their money? They're implying it, yes. Ava felt anger burn hot in her chest. I didn't even know there was money until this week. I took these children in because they needed a home, not because I expected anything from them. I believe you, and I think the judge will too. But we need to be prepared for them to paint you as an opportunist who's manipulating vulnerable children. The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparation. Janet Morrison visited twice, documenting the children's progress and their clear desire to remain with Ava. Teachers submitted reports about their academic and social development. Dr. Sandra Chen, the family therapist the children had been seeing, wrote a detailed assessment of their emotional health and stability, but the most important preparation happened around the kitchen table each evening, as Ava helped the children understand what would happen in court and what they might be asked to say. The judge is going to want to know how you feel about living here versus living with your grandparents, she explained. You need to be honest about your feelings, but also respectful. What if they ask why we don't want to go with them? Emma asked. Then you tell the truth, that you've never had a relationship with them, that this is your home, that family is about more than just blood. Tommy had been quiet throughout these discussions, carrying his usual burden of responsibility for his siblings' welfare. On Thursday night, he came to Ava's room after the others were asleep. What if we lose? He asked without preamble. Then we'll figure out what comes next. That's not really an answer. Ava sighed, setting down the legal briefs she'd been reviewing. Tommy, I can't promise you we'll win. What I can promise is that I'll fight as hard as I know how, and that no matter what happens, you'll always be my son. All of you will always be my children, but if they take us to Alaska, then I'll find a way to stay in your lives. I'll write letters and make phone calls and visit whenever I can. And when you turn 18, if you want to come back here, this will still be your home. Tommy nodded, but she could see the fear in his eyes. These children had lost so much already. The idea of losing their home and their chosen family felt unbearable. There's something else, he said. Something I need to tell you before tomorrow. What is it? The reason Dad never talked to his parents. Rebecca and I figured it out from things Mom said when she thought we weren't listening. Ava waited, sensing this was important. Grandpa Patterson wanted Dad to go into business with him after college. Some kind of development company. But Dad wanted to be a teacher instead, and when he married Mom, she was Mexican-American, from a working-class family. Grandpa said some really awful things about her not being good enough for their family. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. They cut him off, completely. Grandpa told Dad he was dead to them if he chose Mom over family expectations. So Dad chose Mom, and we never heard from them again, Until now. Until now, when there's money involved. Ava felt her protective instincts flare even hotter. These grandparents had rejected their son for choosing love over their prejudices, had ignored their grandchildren for their entire lives, and now wanted to claim them only because an inheritance was involved. Tommy, does the judge need to know this? I think so. I think it explains why they were never part of our lives before, and why we don't trust them now. Friday morning dawned grey and drizzly, the kind of weather that matched everyone's mood as they prepared for court. The children had dressed in their best clothes, outfits purchased during those early shopping trips that now felt like a lifetime ago. They stood in the kitchen, looking like they were preparing for battle, which in many ways they were. "Remember," Ava said, checking Tommy's tie one last time, "be honest, be respectful, and trust that the judge wants what's best for you. What if what's best for us isn't what the law says?" Rebecca asked. "Then we'll figure out how to work around the law." The courthouse was small but imposing, all dark wood and high ceilings, and the kind of formal atmosphere that made children speak in whispers. The Pattersons were already there when they arrived, flanked by their expensive lawyers and wearing expressions of grim determination. Ava watched William Patterson study his grandchildren like he was seeing them for the first time, which, in many ways, he was. These children who'd grown strong and confident in her care, who'd learned to trust that home was permanent and family was chosen, who'd blossomed into themselves once they felt safe enough to stop just surviving. David Mitchell had prepared her for the Patterson strategy, but hearing it laid out in formal legal language was still devastating. They painted her as an opportunist who'd taken advantage of traumatized children, a single woman without adequate resources to manage significant financial assets, an outsider with no legitimate claim to children she'd known for only a few months. Their lawyer was smooth, professional, focused on legal precedents and biological relationships and the financial security that grandparents could provide. He made Ava sound like a well-meaning but temporary solution to a problem that required permanent family commitment. Then it was David's turn, and he focused on a completely different narrative. Not legal precedent, but human reality. Not biological relationships, but chosen family. Not financial security, but emotional stability and love. "Your Honor," he said, "these children have been through more trauma and disruption in the past year than most people experience in a lifetime. They've lost their parents, been separated from each other, lived in multiple foster homes, and finally found stability and love with Miss Jenkins. To uproot them again, to send them thousands of miles away from everything they've learned to call home, would be devastating to their emotional and psychological development." The children testified one by one, starting with Rebecca and working down to Grace. Each of them spoke clearly about their preference to stay with Ava, about feeling safe and loved and truly at home for the first time since their parents died. Grace's testimony was particularly powerful in its simplicity. When the judge asked her why she wanted to stay with Ava, she said, "Because she makes pancakes on Sunday mornings and reads to me when I have bad dreams, and she never gets mad when I ask too many questions. And because she chose us, even when she didn't have to." Tommy's testimony was more complex, touching on their family history and the reasons their grandparents had been absent from their lives. He spoke about forgiveness and respect, but also about trust and love, and the difference between legal relationships and real family bonds. "Your Honor," he said, his 14-year-old voice steady and mature, "I know they're our grandparents by blood, but Ava is our family by choice. She's earned the right to be our mom by showing up every day, by fighting for us, by putting our needs before her own. Blood makes you related, but love makes you family." When the Pattersons took the stand, their testimony focused on financial security, educational opportunities, and family obligation. They spoke about duty and responsibility and their intention to provide for their grandchildren's future. But when the judge asked William Patterson why he'd never been part of the children's lives before now, his answer revealed everything about his character and motivations. "My son made choices I couldn't support," he said stiffly. His marriage, his career, his lifestyle. None of it met our family's standards. We hoped he would eventually come to his senses. And now the children need proper guidance and resources to reach their potential. The judge was quiet for a long moment, studying the legal briefs and testimonies and the faces of 5 children whose futures hung in the balance of her decision. "I'm going to recess for 1 hour to review all the testimony and evidence," she said finally. "When we reconvene, I'll render my decision regarding custody of the Patterson children." The waiting was excruciating. They sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, the children clustered around Ava like they were trying to absorb strength from her presence. The Pattersons waited at the opposite end of the hall, speaking in low voices with their lawyers and occasionally glancing over with expressions that ranged from confidence to irritation. "Whatever happens," Ava whispered, gathering all 5 children into a group hug, "I'm proud of you. You were brave and honest and true to yourselves. That's all anyone can ever ask." "We're proud of you too," Grace whispered back, "for fighting for us, even when it's hard." When they were called back into the courtroom, Ava's heart was beating so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The judge looked at each of them in turn, the children, Ava, the Pattersons, before opening her legal pad and beginning to speak. "This case presents a conflict between biological relationships and chosen family, between legal precedent and human compassion, between what the law typically supports and what appears to be genuinely best for these children." Ava held her breath, afraid to hope. After reviewing all testimony and evidence, considering the children's clearly expressed preferences, and taking into account the stability of their current placement, "I'm denying the Pattersons' petition for custody." The words hit Ava like a physical force. They'd won. The children could stay. Furthermore, the judge continued, "I am granting Ms. Jenkins permanent guardianship of all 5 Patterson children, with the recommendation that she be appointed as trustee for their inheritance until they reach majority." The children erupted into tears and celebration. Ava felt her own tears flowing freely as she hugged each of them, hardly able to believe that this long, terrifying battle was finally over. But as they gathered their things to leave the courthouse, she caught sight of William Patterson's face, angry, bitter, and filled with the kind of resentment that suggested this might not be truly finished. Still, for now, it was enough. The children were hers, legally and permanently, and they were going home together. The celebration was short-lived. They'd barely made it home from the courthouse when David Mitchell called with news that drained the joy from their victory. Like air from a punctured balloon, "The Pattersons are appealing the decision," he said without preamble, "and they've filed an emergency motion claiming you're an unfit guardian." Ava sank into a kitchen chair, watching through the window as the children played in the yard with Buck, finally relaxed for the first time in weeks. "On what grounds?" "They're claiming you've alienated the children from their biological family, that you've been coaching them to lie about their preferences, and that you're financially exploiting them by accepting guardianship of their inheritance." "That's ridiculous. I know that. And you know that. But they've got expensive lawyers who are very good at making ridiculous sound plausible. There's going to be another hearing next week with a different judge. Can they do that? Just keep appealing until they find a judge who agrees with them?" "Not indefinitely, but they can drag this out for months." "And Ava, there's something else. They're requesting immediate temporary custody pending the appeal. If that motion is granted, the children would have to go with them to Alaska while the case is being decided." The phone slipped from Ava's numb fingers and clattered onto the table. Through the window, she watched Grace chase butterflies while Tommy pushed Emma on the tire swing they'd hung from the old oak tree. These children who'd finally learned to feel secure, who'd stopped looking over their shoulders for the next disruption, who'd begun to trust that home was permanent. She picked up the phone. "When?" "Emergency hearing is Monday morning. Judge Harrison will make the decision about temporary custody." "The same judge who ruled in our favor." "No, Judge Williams. David paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. He tends to favor traditional family structures and has strong feelings about the importance of biological relationships. That evening, Ava called a family meeting. All 6 children gathered around the kitchen table with the solemnity of generals planning a military campaign. Because in many ways, that's exactly what they were doing. The Pattersons are trying to overturn the judge's decision, she explained. There's going to be another hearing on Monday. Can they do that? Lila asked, her 10-year-old sense of fairness outraged. Apparently they can, Ava said. And there's a possibility, just a possibility, that the new judge might order you to go with them while the case is being decided. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Tommy spoke. For how long? Until the appeal is resolved. Could be weeks, could be months, and if we refuse to go, then I could be held in contempt of court. I could go to jail, and you'd end up in foster care while the adults fight about what's best for you. Rebecca was the first to put voice to what they were all thinking. So we run. Rebecca, we've done it before, she continued, her voice steady and determined. We know how to survive in the woods. We can disappear until all this legal stuff gets sorted out. Winter's coming, Ava pointed out. And you're not the same children who ran away from foster care. You've gotten used to having warm beds and regular meals and medical care. We've also gotten used to being a family, Emma said fiercely. And we're not letting anyone break that up again, even if it means living rough for months, even if it means living rough forever, Grace said, her 6-year-old voice carrying a determination that broke Ava's heart. They spent the weekend preparing for the possibility that Monday's hearing might go badly. The children packed light bags with essentials and hid them in the woods near their old campsite. Ava withdrew cash from the bank and stocked the hidden camp with supplies that would last for weeks. It felt like preparing for war, and in many ways it was. A war between legal systems and human hearts, between biological claims and chosen family, between what the law said was right and what actually was right. Sunday night, none of them slept well. The house felt fragile, temporary, like they were all holding their breath, waiting for the foundation to crumble beneath them. Monday morning dawned bright and cold, the kind of crisp October day that should have been beautiful but felt ominous instead. They dressed for court again, but this time the children also wore hiking boots and carried small backpacks just in case they needed to disappear into the mountains instead of going home to the cabin. The courthouse felt different this time, heavier with the weight of what could be lost. Judge Williams was older than Judge Harrison, with steel-gray hair and the kind of stern expression that suggested he'd seen too much human foolishness to be impressed by emotional appeals. The Pattersons' lawyer was more aggressive this time, painting Ava as a manipulative woman who'd brainwashed traumatized children into rejecting their biological family. He presented evidence of the camping supplies and cash withdrawals, suggesting she was planning to help the children run away if the hearing didn't go her way. Your Honor, he said, Ms. Jenkins has clearly demonstrated that she's willing to put her own desires above the children's legal and emotional need to form relationships with their biological grandparents. She's turned these children against their family and is preparing to aid them in fleeing lawful custody if this court rules against her. David Mitchell fought back hard, focusing on the children's trauma history and their right to stability after so much upheaval. But Ava could see that Judge Williams was more receptive to arguments about legal precedent and biological relationships than he was to testimony about love and chosen family. When the children testified again, their voices were strong but tinged with desperation. They spoke about their fear of being separated, their need for stability, their love for Ava, and their home in the mountains. But Judge Williams seemed more interested in their relationship with their grandparents. Have you given your grandparents a fair chance? He asked Rebecca. We spent time with them, Your Honor, but they were strangers to us. All relationships take time to develop. Perhaps if you lived with them for a while, you'd find you have more in common than you think, Your Honor, Tommy said, his voice respectful but firm. With all due respect, we know what family feels like. We had it with our parents, and we have it with Ava, Blood doesn't automatically make people family, and time doesn't automatically create love. Judge Williams frowned at this answer, clearly not appreciating a 14-year-old lecturing him about family relationships. When the Pattersons testified, they focused on their legal rights as grandparents and their intention to help the children develop a proper relationship with their father's side of the family. They spoke about forgiveness and healing and their belief that blood relationships were stronger and more important than temporary emotional attachments. These children have been through tremendous trauma, William Patterson said. It's natural that they would form unhealthy attachments to anyone who showed them kindness. But what they need is the stability that comes from real family, not the confusion of pretending strangers are relatives. The hearing lasted 3 hours, but the judge's decision came quickly. After reviewing all testimony and evidence, Judge Williams said, "I find that the children's best interests would be served by developing a relationship with their biological grandparents." While the main custody case is being appealed, Ava felt the world tilt beneath her. "Therefore, I'm granting temporary custody to Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, effective immediately. The children will accompany their grandparents to Alaska while the appeal is pending." The children erupted in protests and tears. Grace threw herself at Ava, clinging with desperate strength. Tommy stood up, his face pale but determined. "Your Honor, we refuse to go." "Young man, this is not a negotiation. This is a court order. Then you'll have to drag us out of here." The courtroom descended into chaos. The Pattersons' lawyer was demanding immediate enforcement of the custody order. David Mitchell was filing emergency motions. The children were crying and clinging to Ava while court officers moved toward them with reluctant determination. And in that moment, Ava made a decision that was probably illegal, but felt absolutely right. "Your Honor," she said, standing with Grace still, wrapped around her legs and her arm around Tommy's shoulders, "I need 5 minutes to help the children understand what's happening and say goodbye." "Properly, please." Judge Williams looked annoyed but nodded curtly. 5 minutes. In the hallway, in the courthouse hallway, with court officers watching their every move, Ava knelt down to face all 5 children. "Listen to me carefully," she whispered. "No matter what happens next, no matter where you go or how long you're gone, you are my children. That doesn't change because of what some judge decides. You carry my love with you wherever you go." "We don't want to leave," Grace sobbed. "I know, baby. But sometimes we have to be brave, even when we're scared. What if they won't let us come back?" Emma asked. "Then I'll come find you. However long it takes, however far I have to go, I will find you and bring you home." The court officers were approaching, clearly uncomfortable with their role, but determined to enforce the judge's order. "Be brave," Ava whispered. "Be smart, take care of each other. And remember that families don't break just because people try to separate them." And then the worst moment of her life began, watching 5 children who'd already lost too much being, taken away from the only home they'd known in over a year, crying her name as they were led out of the courthouse and into a future none of them wanted. The call came at 3 in the morning. 2 weeks after the children had been taken to Alaska, Ava jerked awake from restless sleep, her heart already racing before she was fully conscious. Nothing good ever happened at 3 a.m. "Miss Jenkins." The voice was professional but urgent. "This is Officer Sarah Chen with the Anchorage Police Department. We have 5 children here who say you're their legal guardian." Ava was out of bed and reaching for clothes before the words fully registered. "Are they hurt? Are they safe?" "They're safe now. Cold, hungry, but safe. They were found at the airport trying to buy tickets to Tennessee with cash. Airport security held them until we could sort out what was happening. They ran away. That's what it looks like. Miss Jenkins, these children are very determined to get back to you. They've been asking for you constantly since we picked them up. Where are their grandparents?" "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson are on their way to the station. But Miss Jenkins, I have to tell you, these children are terrified of going back with them. The youngest one, Grace, won't stop crying. They're saying their grandparents have been—" Officer Chen paused, choosing her words carefully, very strict about their adjustment period. Ava's blood went cold. "What does that mean?" I can't discuss ongoing investigations over the phone, but I strongly suggest you get on the first flight to Anchorage. These children need an advocate, and they're asking for you." Ava was dressed and in her car within 10 minutes, Buck beside her in the passenger seat because she couldn't bear to leave him behind. The 3-hour drive to the Nashville airport passed in a blur of prayers and phone calls. To David Mitchell, to Janet Morrison, to the airline to book the earliest possible flight. During the layover in Seattle, David called with an update that made everything both better and worse. "The children are in protective custody," he said. Apparently, they told police the Pattersons were planning to send them to a military-style boarding school in Montana. Separate schools. The boys would have gone to one facility, the girls to another. They were going to split them up. It looks that way. The children overheard a phone conversation about enrollment fees and breaking the unhealthy codependency between the siblings. That's when they decided to run. How did they get to the airport? Took a city bus with money they'd been saving from allowances. Tommy had apparently been planning this escape route since their second day in Alaska. Ava closed her eyes, picturing Tommy, barely 14 years old, researching bus routes and flight schedules, calculating costs and timing, taking responsibility for his siblings' safety once again because the adults had failed them. What happens now? Alaska Child Protective Services is investigating. The Pattersons are claiming the children are lying, that they were only discussing educational options. But the fact that the children fled across half a continent to get away from them is pretty compelling evidence that something was seriously wrong. The Anchorage police station was exactly what Ava expected: fluorescent lights, industrial carpeting, and the kind of institutional atmosphere that made everyone feel like they were in trouble. But when Officer Chen led her to a small conference room, nothing could have prepared her for what she found. 5 children clustered together on plastic chairs, still wearing the expensive winter clothes the Pattersons had bought them, but looking smaller and more fragile than she'd ever seen them. Grace was asleep in Tommy's lap, her face streaked with dried tears. Rebecca and Emma sat pressed against each other, while Jessie stared at the wall with the hollow expression of someone who'd seen too much. "Ava!" Emma's cry broke the stillness, and suddenly she was surrounded by children who were laughing and crying and talking all at once, desperate to prove to themselves that she was really there. "Are you okay?" she asked, checking each face for signs of injury or illness. "Are you hurt?" "We're okay now," Tommy said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "We knew you'd come. Of course I came. I told you I'd find you." "They were going to separate us," Grace whispered, finally awake and clinging to Ava's shirt. "Send us to different schools far away from each other. That's not going to happen," Ava said firmly. "Not ever," Officer Chen returned with coffee and information. "The Pattersons are here, and they're demanding immediate return of the children. But given the circumstances, we're recommending a full investigation before anyone goes anywhere." "What kind of circumstances?" "The children have been very specific about their treatment over the past 2 weeks. Strict isolation from outside contact, no phone calls or letters. Threats about being sent away if they didn't adjust their attitudes about their grandparents. That's emotional abuse. That's what we're investigating. In the meantime, Alaska CPS is placing the children in emergency protective custody until this gets sorted out." "With me?" "If you're willing to stay in Anchorage during the investigation, yes." "How long will that take?" "Could be a few days, could be a few weeks. But Miss Jenkins, I have to tell you, these children's testimony is very compelling. And the fact that they were willing to risk their lives to get away from their grandparents speaks volumes about what they were experiencing." The investigation that followed was thorough and damaging to the Pattersons' case. The children, interviewed separately by trained specialists, told consistent stories about emotional manipulation, isolation, and threats. The Pattersons had taken away all photos of Ava and their life in Tennessee. They'd forbidden any mention of their previous placement and punished displays of sadness or homesickness. Most damning was the discovery that enrollment deposits had indeed been paid to 2 separate boarding schools in Montana, facilities that specialized in behavioral modification for troubled adolescents. They told us we were sick, Rebecca explained to the social worker. That loving Ava more than them was a psychological problem that needed to be fixed. They said families are about blood and duty, not feelings, Emma added, and that if we couldn't learn to be grateful for what they were providing, we'd be sent somewhere that would teach us respect. The final blow came when investigators found emails between William Patterson and the boarding school administrators discussing breaking the trauma bond between the siblings and correcting the damage done by inappropriate attachment to a non-relative caregiver. 5 days after their arrival in Alaska, Ava found herself in another courtroom, this time as the clear winner before the hearing even began. The Alaska judge was furious about the emotional abuse allegations and the attempted separation of siblings who'd already experienced significant trauma. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, the judge said, her voice sharp with disapproval, your actions over the past 2 weeks demonstrate a fundamental misunderstanding of these children's needs and a willingness to cause further psychological harm in pursuit of your own agenda. Your Honor, William Patterson protested, we were trying to help them adjust to appropriate family relationships. You were trying to erase their emotional attachments and replace them with forced compliance. That's not family building. Mr. Patterson, that's psychological manipulation. The custody reversal was swift and decisive. Not only were the children immediately returned to Ava's custody, but the judge issued a scathing rebuke of the Tennessee court's decision to remove them from a stable placement in the first place. These children will return to Tennessee with Miss Jenkins, the judge ordered, and I am recommending that the Tennessee Appellate Court consider this evidence of the Pattersons' unsuitability as guardians when reviewing their appeal. The flight home felt like a celebration, despite the children's exhaustion and the trauma they'd endured. They slept most of the way, curled against Ava like they were afraid she might disappear if they let go. When they finally pulled up the gravel driveway to the cabin, Buck was waiting on the front porch as if he'd known exactly when they'd return. The reunion between dog and children was joyful and tearful, with Buck submitting to being hugged and petted by 6 pairs of hands, while his tail wagged so hard his whole body shook. Are we really home? Grace asked, standing in the kitchen and touching familiar surfaces, as if to prove they were real. You're really home, Ava confirmed. And you're never leaving again unless you want to. That evening, as they sat around the kitchen table, sharing a dinner of pancakes, Grace's request for their homecoming meal, David Mitchell called with the news they'd been hoping for. The Tennessee Appellate Court has dismissed the Pattersons' appeal, he said. Given the evidence from Alaska about their treatment of the children, the court has ruled that your guardianship is in the children's best interests and will not be challenged further. It's really over? It's really over. You're their legal guardian permanently, with full authority over their care and their inheritance. The Pattersons have no further legal recourse. After she hung up, Ava looked around the table at 6 children who were finally truly permanently hers. Children who'd fought to stay together, who'd survived trauma and separation and manipulation, who'd chosen love over fear and family over biology. So, she said, reaching for the coffee can where they kept markers and paper, I think it's time we made this official. Made what official? Tommy asked. Our family. We need to sign something that makes it clear we're choosing each other, not just accepting what the courts decided. They spent the next hour creating what they called the Family Covenant, a handwritten document, signed by all 7 of them. Buck contributed a paw print that established their commitment to each other, regardless of what any law or court or outside authority might say. We, the Jenkins-Patterson family, it read, promise to love each other through good times and bad, to stay together no matter what challenges come, to forgive each other's mistakes, and to always remember that families are built on choice and love, not just blood and law. As they signed their names in careful script, Ava realized this was the moment she'd been waiting for since the day Buck first brought these children out of the woods. Not the legal victories or the court decisions, but this simple act of choosing each other intentionally and completely. They were home, all of them, finally and forever. 6 months later, Ava stood in the cabin's expanded kitchen, watching through the new bay window as her children, because that's what they were now, completely and legally and in every way that mattered, worked together in the garden they'd planted that spring. The addition to the cabin was finally complete. 3 new bedrooms and a larger living space that accommodated a family of 7 with room to spare. Tommy and Jesse were building raised beds for vegetables, their teenage energy channeled into the kind of productive work that would have made their father proud. Rebecca and Emma were planting herbs in carefully labeled rows, arguing good-naturedly about whether basil needed more sun than oregano. Grace and Lila worked together on a flower garden near the front porch, their 10-year-old and 7-year-old hands gentle with seedlings that would bloom throughout the summer. Buck supervised from his favorite spot in the shade, his arthritis slowing him down, but his spirit still bright. At 13, he was officially an old dog, but he carried himself with the dignity of someone who'd completed his most important mission. He'd brought his family home, and now he could rest. The transformation in the children over the past months had been remarkable. The wariness was gone, replaced by the easy confidence of young people who knew they were loved unconditionally. Tommy had grown 3 inches and finally looked like the teenager he was, instead of a miniature adult. Rebecca had joined the school drama club and discovered a talent for writing. Emma's laughter filled the house daily, bright and uninhibited. Jesse had found his voice, literally. He joined the school choir and filled the cabin with music during his practice sessions. And Grace, sweet Grace, had blossomed into a chatty, curious 7-year-old who asked a million questions and believed every answer would lead to another wonderful discovery. Lila had embraced her role as big sister with enthusiasm, appointed herself the family's official social coordinator, and somehow managed to keep track of everyone's schedules, friends, and emotional needs with the efficiency of a professional manager. The legal battles were behind them. The Pattersons had made one final attempt to contact the children through their lawyers. But the children had unanimously declined any relationship with grandparents who'd tried to separate them and erase their chosen family. Some bridges once burned couldn't be rebuilt. The inheritance had been properly managed, invested in education funds and long-term savings that would give all 5 children choices about their futures. But more importantly, Uncle Raymond's trust had provided the financial foundation for their life together. A life that included family vacations, music lessons, college savings, and all the ordinary expenses of raising 6 children with love and intention. Ava had found her own transformation in becoming their mother. The woman who'd once struggled to keep her head above water was now the steady center of a bustling household. She'd discovered reserves of patience, wisdom, and strength she hadn't known she possessed. The job at the diner had evolved into managing the restaurant when Martha decided to retire, giving Ava both flexible hours and the kind of work that felt meaningful in their small mountain community. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Through the front window, she could see Janet Morrison climbing the porch steps, but this wasn't an official visit. Janet had become a friend over the months, someone who checked in regularly, not because she had to, but because she cared. "Coffee?" Ava offered, opening the door. "Always," Janet said, settling into her usual chair at the kitchen table. "How's everyone doing?" "Look outside and see for yourself," Janet smiled, watching the children work in their garden. "They look happy. They are happy. We all are. Any regrets?" "About taking on 5 additional children when you were barely managing with one?" It was a question Janet asked periodically, not because she doubted Ava's commitment, but because she understood the magnitude of what had happened here. A single mother with limited resources had chosen to take in 5 traumatized children, fight for them through complex legal battles, and build a family that defied conventional wisdom about how families were supposed to form. Never, Ava said without hesitation. Not even during the worst moments. These children saved me as much as I saved them. How so? Ava considered the question, looking around the kitchen that had become the heart of their home. The walls were covered with school art projects, family photos, and a hand-lettered copy of their family covenant. The refrigerator was a collage of soccer schedules, honor roll certificates, and grocery lists written in 6 different handwritings. Every surface showed evidence of a house lived in by people who loved each other. Piano music drifting from the living room where Rebecca practiced, the sound of laughter from the garden. Buck's contented snores from his spot by the fireplace. I spent so many years just surviving, she said finally, working multiple jobs, worrying about money, feeling like I was always one crisis away from losing everything. I was so focused on keeping Lila and me afloat that I forgot what it felt like to actually live. And now? Now I wake up every morning knowing exactly why I'm here. These children need me. But more than that, they've taught me what family really means. Not just the people you're related to, but the people you choose to love and protect and build a life with. As if summoned by their conversation, the children began trooping into the house, dirty and sweaty and pleased with their morning's work. They filled the kitchen with chatter about the garden, plans for dinner, and requests for snacks that would tide them over until lunch. "Mrs. Morrison," Grace exclaimed, launching herself at Janet for a hug. "Did you see our flowers? We planted sunflowers that are going to be 10 feet tall." "I did see them. They're going to be beautiful." Tommy appeared in the doorway holding an envelope. "This came in the mail," he said, handing it to Ava. "Looks official." The envelope was from the county school district, and inside was a letter that made Ava's heart skip. The local high school was starting a program for students interested in agriculture and sustainable living. They wanted to partner with families who were already practicing these principles to provide internships and mentorship opportunities. "They want to use our garden as a teaching site," she told the children, who'd gathered around to hear the news. "Students would come here to learn about organic farming, family cooperation, and sustainable living. So we'd be teachers?" Emma asked, eyes bright with possibility. "You'd be examples," Ava said, "of how families can work together to create something beautiful and sustainable." That evening, after Janet had gone home and the children were settled with homework and evening activities, Ava found herself on the front porch with a cup of tea and a letter that had arrived that morning from an unexpected source. "Dear Miss Jenkins," it read, "my name is Maria Santos, and I am a social worker in Phoenix, Arizona. I have been following your case through professional networks, and I am writing to ask for your advice. We have a situation here involving 3 siblings who have been living in the desert after running away from foster care. They are indigenous children whose parents died in a car accident, and like your children, they refuse to be separated. I know this is an unusual request, but I was wondering if you might be willing to speak with these children about their options. They need to hear from someone who understands their situation and can help them believe that staying together is possible. If you are willing, I can be reached at the number below. Thank you for everything you have done to prove that families can be built on love rather than just law." Ava read the letter twice, understanding that this was how Uncle Raymond's legacy would continue, not through grand gestures or legal precedents, but through one family helping another. One set of lost children being guided home by someone who understood what home really meant. She looked out at the mountains that had sheltered them, the woods where Buck had first found their family, the garden where her children were learning to grow things with their own hands. This place that had started as a last resort had become the foundation for something larger than she'd ever imagined. Tomorrow she would call Maria Santos. She would share their story and offer hope to 3 more children who needed to believe that families could choose each other across all boundaries of blood and law and convention. But tonight, she simply sat on her porch and listened to the sounds of her family, piano music and gentle laughter, The murmur of bedtime stories being read, Buck's contented sighs from his spot by the fireplace. Sounds that spoke of safety and love, and the kind of permanence that came not from legal documents, but from daily choice and unconditional commitment. In the distance, she could hear Lila calling for Grace to come brush her teeth, and Tommy reminding Jesse to finish his math homework, and Rebecca practicing lines for the school play. The ordinary, beautiful chaos of a house full of children who knew they belonged. As the last light faded behind the mountains and the first stars appeared overhead, Ava smiled and went inside to tuck her children into beds they knew would still be theirs tomorrow, and the day after that, and for as long as they needed them. Sometimes grace found you when you least expected it. Sometimes the thing you thought was the end of one story turned out to be the beginning of something much better. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you got to learn that love was always stronger than law, and chosen family was the most powerful force in the world. They were home, all of them, finally and forever and completely, the end of one journey and the beginning of everything that mattered.